Yeah, so like I was saying, I've been thinking a lot about classroom rewards lately, and there's definitely an effective way to do them and a not so effective way.
Any examples?
Yeah.
Kyle, I'm glad I found you. I'm you from an alternate universe, and I need your help. I've been thinking about classroom rewards lately,
Hey, so have I.
but none of the strategies I'm using seem to be working. There's stickers all over my classroom, and I'm handing out candy faster than I can buy it.
Wow, it sounds like you need to be more intentional with your classroom rewards. You know, I tell you what, why don't you hang out here, watch Launch Your Classroom? We've got some really great strategies this week. I'll be back in 20. Welcome to Launch Your Classroom. I'm Kyle Pope. Let me ask you a question. Why do you teach? As someone who's had the privilege of working with numerous teachers, both national and international, I've been able to ask this question a lot. And for many of them, myself included, the answer was not salary. Usually their response was that they enjoyed seeing the impact they had on their students' lives. That's what motivated them. So, what about our students? As educators in the US, we can fall into the trap of believing that all of our students are driven by making good grades. But quite frankly, that's not always the case. For some of our students, they may try as hard as they can, but still cannot achieve an A. For others, they may follow all of our rules and procedures, but don't get recognized for their efforts. As educators, we need to provide ways for these types of students to be rewarded and incentivized in our class. Because just as teachers aren't always motivated by salary, students aren't always motivated by grades. So today, we're going to talk about 3 different reward systems that you can put into place immediately. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. This reward system is called the bean jar. All you're going to need is an empty jar, some tape, a marker, something to fill up the jar with. Here are a couple examples. We have 2 different sizes, and both of these are very usable. And then we have some dried beans. We've got some different colored fuzzy pom-poms. It's all up to your preference. You should be able to find all of these items at any of your local craft stores. But for demonstration purposes, we're going to use some multicolored beads. So let's get started. Take the tape and write 2 to 3 different rewards on it with your marker. Then place the tape at different places horizontally across the jar. You want to start with the smallest reward at the bottom and your largest reward at the top. This is a class-wide reward system, so make sure that everyone in your class can receive the reward at the same time. Once your setup is complete, you'll tell the class that every time they perform well as a whole, then you'll put a handful of beads in the jar. This can be when they correctly follow any of your procedures, or when they all turn in their homework, or any other major classroom accomplishment. Once the jar fills up to the first piece of tape, your class receives the corresponding reward. Make sure that the first one's pretty easy to obtain. If you want to space your rewards out, you should definitely use the bigger jar. And if you choose to use pom-poms, they can add a neat visual element, as the bigger pieces can represent more significant actions. After the class achieves all the rewards, then you can empty out the jar, change up the rewards, and motivate them to start all over again. Speaking of motivation, Samuel is going to tell us a bit about the science behind all of this.
What makes us do the things that we do? Understanding the science of motivation, the conscious and unconscious mental processes that direct our actions, can be extremely useful for teachers. Let's take a look. Motivation can be divided into 2 types, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. When you are intrinsically motivated to do something, you're doing that activity for its own sake. The activity satisfies you, and performing is its own reward. When you are extrinsically motivated, you perform an activity because you either want to avoid a punishment or earn a reward. In short, extrinsic motivation comes from outside forces, and intrinsic comes from the inside. In the classroom, this can come into play with classroom rewards. A student who studies a subject they find personally interesting is intrinsically motivated. Students who complete assignments in expectation of a reward are extrinsically motivated. When used intentionally, extrinsic classroom rewards can actually contribute toward building intrinsic motivation in your students. To do this, keep the following things in mind. Only give rewards when they are earned and deserved. If you reward students for incomplete work or minimal effort, you devalue the reward and the student is unlikely to become intrinsically motivated. Let your particularly engaging or exciting classroom activities serve as their own reward. Researchers have observed that being rewarded for an activity you're already motivated to perform actually reduces motivation. And finally, don't let your rewards become expected or routine. Neuroscientists can tell you that the anticipation of potentially receiving a reward for an activity creates significantly more dopamine in the brain than knowing for sure that a reward is coming. While we as teachers would like for all of our students to be intrinsically motivated, the reality is that both forms of motivation are important to encouraging engagement and achievement in your classroom.
Now that you know about the science, let's talk about how to maximize your reward system's effectiveness. Here are our top tips for using reward systems in the classroom. Number 1, rewards are only part of a good classroom management plan. Don't become overly reliant on them. You'll still need routines, procedures, along with rules and consequences for when students are not following those rules. Number 2, keep your reward system positive. If a student earns a reward or earns points towards a reward, those are theirs to keep. Do not take away items for misbehaviors. Good actions should stand on their own and not be negated by future conduct. So make sure your consequences are not related to the reward. Number 3, keep your rewards connected to your classroom as much as possible. For example, you could give out preferential seating for a day or allow a student to pack up early. Many teachers like to use a food reward, and that's perfectly fine every once in a while as long as your administration agrees. But try not to be too dependent on sweets like candy. For more information about food as a reward, let's go to Lunch Your Classroom with Heather.
Just like the other Kyle, you may be using candy to reward your students. And why not? Candy is generally inexpensive and students are super motivated to earn it. However, there are some downsides to relying too heavily on candy as a reward, like having hyperactive students and encouraging unhealthy eating habits. Some healthier alternatives could include individually packed items like granola bars, non-buttered popcorn, trail mix, pretzels, or fruit snacks. Great job, Arthur. You can even personalize the manufacturer-sealed bags with decorations like stickers or ribbons. It would be a nice touch to include an encouraging note, especially if you're handing out individual rewards. Before you use food as a reward in your classroom, you need to first speak with your administrators and confirm that it's allowed. Then, check with your students to determine if there are any food allergies in your class. You should also send a note home so that parents can identify any potential issues. It's important to note that nut allergies are very common in the US, and many schools have banned them altogether. So, if you do decide to bring in some healthier alternatives, just be sure to consider these additional points when providing food rewards. Do not make your own food or treats to bring into the class because you could be held legally liable if any students get sick or have an allergic reaction to the food. Create a budget for your reward system and stick to it. You don't want to spend all of your hard-earned money on expensive candy or food items. And again, always check with your administration before bringing in any kind of food reward, as you want to make sure that you're compliant with the school's policies. Food can be a fun way to reward your students, and it's all right to use candy from time to time. But if you rely on food as your primary source of reward, please consider the healthy alternatives.
Now we're going to talk about an individual reward system called the lottery jar. This one will allow you to recognize specific students based on their efforts in class. For materials, all you're going to need is a jar, some small pieces of paper, and something to write with. Tell your students which behaviors you'll be looking for as the week begins. For example, hey class, this week I'm looking for students who raise their hand before speaking. This is a great way to teach or reteach your rules and procedures. So each time you see a student exhibiting a desired behavior, praise them verbally. Thank you, Travis, for raising your hand before speaking. Then write their name down on one of your pieces of paper with a brief note about their desired behavior. Then place it into the jar. At the end of the week, pull a few names out and then read them out loud, praise the specific behaviors that were demonstrated, then provide them with an individual reward or their choice of rewards. Luckily, we have Helena to tell us a little more about the power of individual rewards in the United States.
Educators' classroom strategies may differ on the basis of their cultural values and beliefs. One of the dimensions that varies across cultures and is most studied by cultural psychologists has been the difference between individualistic and collectivist cultures. In collectivist societies, people are integrated into strong, cohesive groups that promote selflessness, whereas in individualistic cultures, it is expected that individuals are self-reliant and independent. So if I ask you to finish the following sentence, I am, how would you describe yourself? Would you say something like, I'm smart and funny, relating to your personal traits and viewing yourself as independent? Or would you rather say something like, I'm a loyal and caring friend, defining yourself in terms of your relationships with others? Western cultures tend to be more individualistic, with the United States having one of the highest scores on individualism in the world. Knowing about this cultural dimension is very important since it doesn't only affect the way people describe themselves, it also affects the way students learn in our class. Now, what are the things that you may need to do differently when teaching in a more individualistic culture like the United States? When teaching more individualistic students, it's important to encourage debates by letting students express their own thoughts and opinions on a topic. Also, always see your students as individuals, know their names, and praise them individually. You may say something like, "Thank you very much for this fantastic input, Sally." Additionally, it's important to acknowledge and reward individual accomplishments, as there is a higher emphasis on standing out in class and being unique. A common individual incentive system for elementary students can include giving out pride buttons and announcing a star of the day. For secondary school students, a great choice is the lottery jar Kyle mentioned earlier. Knowing about those cultural preferences is important in order to be able to switch between cultural frames when necessary. I'm sure that by being aware of our own cultural tendencies and the ones of our students, we will be able to create the most effective learning environment possible.
That was some really interesting information about the differences of culture as they're related to reward systems. So now I have Ryan with me. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So as you know, we're talking about reward systems today. Can you give us some examples of rewards that you gave your students?
Yeah, I tried to stay away from things like candy and toys, not only because they were, against some of the rules in my classroom anyway, but also just because like candy, and they're gone, right? So I always tried to do things that could stay in the classroom and be used in the classroom. Lead pencils, really, fun pens even. And then I always tried to do things where if I could find a tie-in to a unit or a lesson, then I would try to put things like that into my rewards. But it doesn't always have to be a material. Sometimes it can be, hey, we're going to go to recess 5 minutes early, or I'm going to play soccer with you. I'm going to play this game with you, which they really enjoyed because it doesn't happen often.
Right. So then how important would you say is choice when it comes to reward for the student?
Well, I think you need to know the students, obviously. The younger students, I tried to keep my rewards a little more constant because there's issues of fairness. They're very focused on things like that. But as the students age, they do really respond to novelty, and you've got to find ways to keep them engaged and motivated. And they will get tired of the same old, same old.
Yeah, right. So we're talking about 3 reward systems today. We're talking about a class-wide reward system. We're talking about individual reward systems. And we're talking about small group reward systems. Did you have a preference amongst those 3?
Not so much a preference, but I do believe there is absolutely a time and a place for each one of those. The classroom reward system is must. Because there are so many times that you need your entire class to do something, lining up or calling them to attention, absolutely necessary that you have a way to reward them when they do it. For the individual, I think, we talk a lot about differentiating instruction, but we need to also remember that you must differentiate your approaches to incentivizing and motivating. So yeah, there are times where you need to change it up and come up with a reward system for maybe one student or two students. Now with the group, I always really enjoyed that because it's a really fun way when you're doing these activities that can be difficult to manage to incentivize a group to follow certain rules. For example, in like a science experiment, you go around, you say 1 point for every safety regulation that you're following. You go around, you keep a little tally, and the students get into it. And by the way, they're doing exactly what they need to do to be safe and to learn effectively. Right. So definitely a time and a place.
Oh, good. So speaking of group reward systems, I hear that you're going to demonstrate one for us coming up next.
I am. What would a friendly competition be without a scoreboard? All right, so this is Scoreboard. It's a really easy strategy to help you reward those groups that are following your rules, following your procedures, and doing the things that you need those groups to do, and it's really easy for teachers. So in this demonstration, I've used some technology to demonstrate the strategy. I always like to do that in my classroom, but you don't have to do it this way. You can do this strategy with some construction paper, poster board. All you really need is a way to display points awarded to groups. So here's how you do Scoreboard. Step 1, you divide out the groups. I always like to let my students make their own group names, and you'll see those. I've written them right down here. Then you want to make sure that you are up and active and really rotating around your room and watching the groups. Now here's the trick. You only reward a point to a group when every member is doing exactly what you've asked them to do, following a rule, a routine, a procedure. And then you want to kind of make a big deal about it when you award the points. And so it might go something like this. Maybe you're having a science lesson, you're walking around, you're trying to teach them to make sure they're always safe, and you may say, wow, Team Blue Lightning, every single person has on their safety goggles. That is most definitely worth a point. I see Team Kiddo over there. Everybody's got their aprons on just like I asked, so I'm going to give you a point as well. We have about 20 more minutes. At the end of this lesson, you're going to get the reward. Super easy, really fun, and I hope you find that it will help you manage those small group activities.
Maybe you've heard this gift-giving rule before. Something you want, something you need, something to eat, and something to read. Well, usually we take this to mean giving a gift to someone else. Let's turn it around. When you're giving your all to students, friends, and family, how about giving a gift to yourself for a change? First of all, giving yourself a reward is a great motivational tool. You know how your students get so excited when they see the bean jar is almost full, or that they almost have 10 stickers. It's simple human psychology. Treats reinforce good behavior and hard work, and help build good habits. It trains our brains to trust that hard work brings a pleasant outcome. Simple as that. So when and how should you plan to reward yourself? Don't be afraid to use treats to motivate yourself towards victories both big and small. Finishing lesson plans for the week, turning in grades on time, or rounding out that last parent-teacher conference are all occasions to celebrate. Take a moment to give to yourself when you feel accomplished. You don't have to move mountains to deserve a pat on the back. Let's go back to our gift-giving rule for suggestions. Something you want. Want more time? Make a deal with yourself. If you spend 30 minutes extra before or after school tackling work, your reward could be a free weekend. Something you need. Think of rewarding yourself in a way that incentivizes continuing a good habit, especially if it makes life more convenient. Getting tired of grading with school-issued pens and dull pencils? Buy a nicer set for your use only. Something to eat. This one is simple. Pack your favorite takeout for lunch one day, grab a fancy coffee on the way into work, or invite colleagues to join you in a celebratory dinner after you all meet a big deadline. Something to read. By read, think more of your favorite turn your brain off activity. Maybe if you grade 20 papers, you'll watch a new episode of your favorite TV show. Or if your class excels at exams, you'll buy a new book to enjoy from your favorite series. Rewards and gifts don't have to be big or expensive. It's the little things in life that tend to make all the difference. Self-care isn't selfish. Don't forget about yourself.
Well, Kyle, what did you think? Thanks, Kyle. Those were some great classroom rewards. I'm going to start using Bean Jar tomorrow. Well, I guess I better head back now. See you around, and hey, I really like the goatee. Thanks. We all have them in my universe.
Huh. We ask a lot of our students. We expect them to follow our rules, routines, and procedures. We want them to always be on time and to turn in every assignment. We encourage them to participate in our discussions and to respect other people's opinions. However, usually the only institutional reward available is a grade on their report card. Today, we've talked about 3 reward systems that you can use that will help provide incentive and allow you to recognize effort, not just outcome. Finding what works for your students will add to your classroom management, and well, it's the right thing to do. So choose one of those reward systems and start using it as soon as possible. I bet you'll see an impact on your students' lives. And isn't that what motivates you? Thank you, and I hope you'll join us for the Q&A.
All right. Thanks for watching and for the great questions we've been getting in the chat, our social media channels, and emails. We're going to answer as many of these as we can today. Remember, if you have any questions about classroom rewards, put them in the chat and we'll answer them live. Joining us today for the Q&A is, as always, the host of Launch Your Classroom Live, Kyle Pope. Glad to be back, Kyle.
Yeah, it's great to be back, and it's not every day that you get to meet yourself.
And also joining us today is the classroom strategist, Samuel. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
All right, let's take a look at our first question. This comes in from Isamar. My school already has a school-wide reward system, but can I still use one of the systems you demonstrated?
Yeah, thanks, Isamar. This is actually a great question. A lot of schools do have those school-wide reward systems. A lot of times they're the individual style systems where there's kind of like a classroom economy or something like that. So if you want to implement another reward system, do something that complements it. So once again, if it is like an individual reward system, you maybe want to use the group reward system or the whole class reward system. Something that stands out as being a little bit different than what the school already uses. But it is always a great idea to check with your administration first if they do have that school-wide reward system, just to make sure that they're okay with you going a little bit further. But thank you for that question.
Okay. Up next, we have a question from Antonia. I want to use Bean Jar, but I'm worried that my students might not buy in if they have to wait for a reward. Any tips, Samuel?
Hi, Antonia. This is a great question. If you're really concerned, you can use a smaller jar. You're the one who puts the tape on it, and you can put the tape near the bottom for an easy reward. If you want to make it happen quicker, put a bigger handful of beans in. Overall, you are in control of how quickly the class gets a reward. I would also say to not do this all the time, or your students will constantly expect to be rewarded. Once you have given them a few rewards, it's time to slow it down. So thank you so much for your question.
All right, thank you, Samuel. Up next, we have a question from Shannon. For the lottery jar, how can you do this without taking too much time away from the lesson? Kyle, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. So a lot of this is just preparation. Make sure that you have the jar ready, make sure that you have pieces of paper ready. If you like to walk around your classroom a lot like I did, keep those paper in your pocket along with something to write with. And, as you're seeing that behavior, call it out and just write it down as you're calling it out. And then next time you're making a pass by the lottery jar, drop it in. So, you don't have to do 5 or 10 of these at once. Just get that first modeled great behavior that you want, write that one down, stick it in the jar, and for the end of the week, just designate maybe 5 or 10 minutes of class time and then go over who won those rewards. If you're finding that doing it every week is a little too much, you can always make the lottery jar kind of a 2-week thing or bi-weekly, so where you're just taking 5 or 10 minutes at the end of every other week instead. Thank you for your question, Shannon.
Okay. Up next, we have a question from Claudia. How can I make sure that I'm being fair when giving out rewards to multiple students? Kyle?
Yeah, so Claudia, a big part of this would be, giving student options in rewards. So if the student has the option of choosing what they want to, and you have enough of that item, then it's going to be inherently fair because they are getting that specific reward that they have a choice in. But also, if you're giving the whole class rewards, if it's something you're really concerned about, go for the whole class reward. And that way everybody is getting the whole exact same thing. So it's inherently fair. Thank you very much, Claudia.
Okay. And now we have a question from a different Claudia. Some students are motivated by rewards, but what about the ones who only do their work if they are getting a reward? What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, so, this is kind of what Samuel was talking about earlier in the episode. Some students are just totally motivated on their own and they don't need the reward, but others, they do need it in order to get them to that next step, to that next level. And this is part of why we do a reward system. If this is what motivates them, a sticker, and they're going to do their work and they're going to learn and they're going to achieve those goals and ultimately, become better for that, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like real life. We get rewards when we do good things, at work or in our social circles. And so, it's no different than that. So if a student's motivated by that reward, it's not a big issue. But thank you so much for your question, Claudia.
All right. Let's see what we have next. This is a question from Enzo. Why is giving candy out regularly a bad idea? My students seem to really like it. Sam?
Hi, Enzo. Thank you so much for your question. There's two major reasons for this. A lot of times giving out candy will upset parents who, don't want their children to have a lot of sugar, or they may have their children on specific diets like we were talking about in the episode. You don't want to make parents angry. Second, you probably have hyper students from all of the sugar and candies, and this could lead to some classroom management issues. They won't be calm and acting like they should. And last, it could pile up a lot of trash. They'll pull the wrapper off, throw it in the floor, and that means you'll have to clean it up or they'll have to clean it up. So overall, let candy be a special reward in certain circumstances. Thank you so much for your question.
All right. Erica asks, hello from Jamaica. Hello, Erica. How do you reward the achievers without allowing those who have not done so well feel inferior? Kyle?
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, if this becomes a huge concern for you, you once again may want to do that whole class reward system. So, every student in your class will achieve a reward. If you still want to do the individual rewards and are worried about the students being left out, you can reward different things. You can reward students just turning in their homework. You can reward students for very specific types of behaviors, and you don't have to choose the same exact students every single time to get an individual reward. As a matter of fact, I'm glad you brought this up because you shouldn't. You should reward different students as much as possible. Look and find something positive about that student and then make that fit within the context of your reward system to make sure that they're not feeling left out. But this is an absolutely wonderful question. I'm glad you brought this up. Thank you, Erica.
Our next question comes from Edward. If students do not like the gifts that they like, then what can I do? Kyle, what do you think?
Hey, Edward, thanks for the question. Yeah, this is definitely a case for allowing students to kind of choose or give them options in what that gift may be. I would even maybe set out a little poll You could list a few things that you think are reasonable to give out as rewards, and then have the students check maybe their top 3 of what they would like, and you can take a real quick poll of your students so you kind of know what rewards you should lean into and that type of thing. But I think that if you do this, if you offer them a chance to kind of voice the things that they like and they're reasonable and you're willing to give those things as a reward, then that's one way that you can avoid this scenario. So thank you, Edward.
Okay, and our last question of the day is coming in from John Ray. Is it possible that they will choose their own reward aside from what you have prepared? Guys?
Yeah, John, this is very similar to kind of what we were talking about with Edward just now. You know, if they want a specific reward and it's reasonable, once again, you know, allow them the opportunity to kind of tell you about that. And maybe next time around you bring that into the classroom. Having that student choice and giving them a big variety of options of things to choose from when they do get a reward is always a great idea. But yeah, listen to your students, give options, and I think you'll be fine. So thank you.
All right, everyone. That's all the questions we have time for today. Please join us back here in 2 weeks for the next episode of Launch Your Classroom Live. Student groups. We all know that we should incorporate collaborative learning in our classrooms, but how do we ensure that they stay productive and on task? Join us next time for Managing Small Groups. In the meantime, keep an eye on our YouTube page. Next week, we'll see the release of 2 more great just-in-time tips from our Launch Your Classroom Replay series, as well as our first Launch Your Classroom Explorer on Friday. This short video is going to show you 3 more ways to reignite learning at the beginning of your lesson. To get the most out of our next episode, make sure you use the link in the description below to head over to Amazon.com and check out our Launch Your Classroom ebook series. These ebooks are packed with tips, infographics, instructional videos, and so much more. And remember, to stay up to date on all the free professional development that EPI offers, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel? And while you're at it, click the bell icon to receive notifications when we're live. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.